Star Trek, The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy. Secret of the Lizard People. Chapter 1. Super Jovian planet ignition, said the Academy instructor, a man named Pritchard, whose jug-handle ears were each almost as large as his narrow, bony face.
What is it? And why should we care?
Without the slightest hesitation, Data raised his hand. His friend Cinna, who was sitting next to him in the Academy's large, semicircular lecture hall, looked at him and rolled her eyes. No doubt it seemed to her that he was always the first one to come up with an answer, despite the relative obscurity of the subject. Then again, Data was an android, with a positronic brain capable of storing as much information as a fair-sized computer. So it should have come as no surprise to his fellow cadets that he knew a few more things than they did.
Mr. Data,
said Pritchard, taking notice of the android's raised hand.
I see that you, at least, are as prepared as ever.
He cleared his throat.
Well then?
Super Jovian planet ignition, Data declared, is a process that involves a pair of gas giant planets on a collision course. One of these bodies must be at least 75 times the mass of Jupiter, the other 10 or more times Jupiter's mass. When such worlds come together with sufficient impact, the greater of the two may grow heavy enough to begin fusion and become a new small star. The instructor nodded approvingly.
Yes, exactly right. And of what significance is this to us?
This time there were a number of hands, Cinna's among them. But Pritchard's gaze remained fixed on Data.
Go on,
he told the android. Cinna grunted softly. The streaks that ran from her temples behind her ears and down her neck turned an even deeper shade of blue, further evidence of her frustration. Ignoring his friend, Data provided the response required of him. As Starfleet officers, he explained, we may encounter this phenomenon, or something similar. At such a time, it will be our responsibility to recognize what is happening and to record it with the appropriate array of sensor instruments. Moreover, a super Jovian ignition may cause gravitic aberrations in space, creating hazards for starships, and also for planetary populations in the same solar system. The instructor smiled.
Very good, Mr. Data. Very good indeed. And you will be glad to learn that there will soon be a chance for you to put your theoretical knowledge to the test.
The android looked at Pritchard and shook his head. No, sir, he said. I will not be. The instructor's smile faded a bit.
I don't think you understand what I'm telling you, he persisted. You see, you and everyone else in this room have been selected to take part in the examination of a super Jovian planet ignition. A real one, mind you, not a holographic recreation. Starfleet is taking the Republic out of mothballs for the occasion, so you can all get some deep space experience under your belts.
All around Data, cadets were grinning and nudging each other enthusiastically. Cinna seemed pleased as well, but the android could not take part in their celebration. Nor could he allow Pritchard's remark to go uncorrected. I am not glad to learn of the activity you have described, said Data. The instructor looked at him, his wispy eyebrows pinching together.
And why is that? He inquired.
As an android, he explained, I am incapable of gladness, just as I am incapable of sorrow, anger, or affection. In fact, I am incapable of any emotion at all. Pritchard sighed and folded his arms across his chest. Ah, yes, of course. I am familiar with your troubles in that regard, Mr. Data. I assure you, when I said glad, I intended it only as a figure of speech. The android tilted his head slightly, a habit of his when engaged in an attempt to comprehend human behavior. I see, he responded. Understanding spoken language would be so much easier, he mused, if people would only say what they really meant. Recognizing idioms had been a particular problem for him since his arrival at the academy nearly 3 weeks ago. Indeed, he had been here less than an hour before a fellow cadet generously advised him to pull up a chair. Data had done exactly as the cadet had suggested. It was only after his action was followed by a round of uproarious laughter that Cinna offered him an explanation. It seemed pull up a chair was jargon for sit down. Again, a case where humans perversely refused to speak in precise terms. Back on the Tripoli, the Starfleet ship that had discovered him in the Omicron Theta system 3 years earlier, he had had little contact with any crewman but Captain Thorson, and Thorson was always careful to use words the android could not misunderstand. Even after his departure from the Tripoli, his experience with biological beings had been limited. As a result, he was almost totally unprepared for the onslaught of quirky and unfamiliar words and phrases that the other cadets seemed to employ on a constant basis. Unfortunately, this did not work to enhance Data's chances of being accepted among them. After the chair incident, the other cadets appeared to see him as somewhat different, somewhat apart, and therefore to avoid him whenever possible. It was a pity, he thought. After all, he had come to the academy seeking the companionship of what he believed were his peers. Perhaps when one was an artificial life form, he thought, one could have no peers, except Cinna, of course, and hers was a most unusual case. Data had met Cinna on the transport vessel bearing both of them to the academy. She was one of 4 Yan who had been accepted into that year's freshman class. Since the Yan were a clannish species, given to congregating in groups and depending too much on one another's support, the academy administrators had seen fit to separate Cinna and her companions as much as possible. Apparently, this was perfectly acceptable to Cinna, who had acquired a measure of independence through her association with the android. It was a good thing for Data, too. Without Cinna, he would have had no friends here at all. Well then, said Pritchard, I believe that's all the time we have for today, but if you're smart, you'll study up on the phenomenon you're about to witness out in space. He turned to the android. Except for you, of course, Mr. Data. You obviously know all you need to know about Super Jovian planet ignitions, and just about everything else. The android inclined his head ever so slightly. Thank you, he told the instructor, even though he knew Pritchard was wrong. There were many things he didn't know, things that came as easily as breathing to all the other cadets, and at times he wondered if he would ever be clever enough to learn them. It wasn't long before Data, Cinna, and the rest of their academy contingent were beamed up to the Starship Republic and shown to their quarters by the vessel's skeleton crew. The idea was that with some 50 cadets aboard, only a handful of real officers would be needed to pilot the Republic and oversee the necessary experiments. Within hours, the ship broke its orbit around Earth and took off for Beta Orientalis, the system where the Super Jovian planet in question would soon become a full-fledged star. At slightly more than Warp 8, the Republic was slated to complete the journey in 4 days. It was at an after-dinner briefing that Data learned which cadets he would be working with and what experiments they would be conducting. As it turned out, the android subgroup would be in charge of recording certain mass-to-energy conversion ratios, as important a job as any other on this voyage. However, that was not the news that intrigued Data the most. It was the fact that second-year cadet Glenn Majors had been chosen by Captain Clark to lead the subgroup. "You know him?" asked Cinna. At that moment, Majors was standing on the other side of the briefing room. He was tall and athletic-looking, with thick, dark, wavy hair and a quick, easy smile. He was surrounded by several ranks of admiring first-year cadets, most of them female. "We have never met," Data conceded. "However, I have read a great deal about him. Cadet Majors has set new records in several of the Academy's academic and physical performance categories. By all accounts, he is destined for a choice spot on one of the fleet's foremost vessels." Cinna grunted. "Really?" she said. She didn't appear to be particularly impressed. The android, on the other hand, was determined to meet Glenn Majors. It seemed to him he could learn a lot from such an accomplished young man. However, before Data could carry out his intent, he was approached by a couple of first-year cadets. One was slender, with hair the color of ripe wheat. The other was shorter and powerfully built, with dark eyes and a complexion to match. The android had seen both cadets in class, though he had not been introduced to either of them. Apparently, that was about to change. "Aye," said the slender one, smiling warmly at both Data and his companion. "I'm McCall. My friend here is Piazza." "Yes," the android responded. "I know. I have heard various instructors refer to you by name." Cinna just nodded her head. She didn't seem particularly enthusiastic to meet these two. "And your Data," noted the one called Piazza. He fixed his dark, almost black eyes on the android. Data was not surprised that the cadet knew him. He was, after all, the only android in the entire academy, perhaps in the entire universe. "In fact," he said, "I am Data." Remembering his manners, he indicated his companion with a gesture. "And this is Cinna. She is a first-year student at the academy as well." The two cadets turned to the Yana. "Pleased to meet you, Cinna," said McCall. Cinna eyed him. "Same here," she answered. But even the android could tell that her heart wasn't in it. He wondered about that. Turning back to Data, McCall said, "They tell me you're an android. Is that true?" "Quite true," Data confirmed. "I've never met an android before," the human went on soberly. His brows met over the bridge of his upturned nose. "What's it like?" he asked. And then with even greater intensity, "Being you, I mean?" As McCall completed his query, Data saw him dart a sideways glance at Piazza. Piazza glanced back. "It is difficult to answer that question," the android replied honestly. "Having never been anyone else, I have no ready standard for comparison." McCall nodded sagely. "I understand. Maybe I can put it another way, then." He paused, appearing to weigh his choice of words carefully. Finally, he seemed to have devised the proper phrasing. "When you get hungry, do you prefer to eat raw metals or alloys? And do you prefer them with condiments or without?" Data looked at him. Apparently, this individual knew very little about androids, but then he was hardly alone in that regard. "First of all," he answered, "I do not get hungry, though I may sometimes eat when others are eating, for the sake of sociability. For the purpose of nutrition, I occasionally ingest a semi-organic nutrient suspension in a silicone-based liquid medium. However, I have never felt the need to sample either metals or alloys, nor do I indulge in condiments of any sort." Piazza cleared his throat. Data glanced at him, but saw that the cadet's discomfort was only momentary. "And what about rest?" asked McCall.
You feel the need to catch a few winks now and then, don't you?
If by winks you're referring to sleep, the android explained, then I do not seem to feel such a need. My systems are efficient enough that they do not require downtime. However, I could mimic sleep by slowing down my various functions. That is, if I were motivated to do so. Cadet Piazza found it necessary to clear his throat again.
Sorry, he said. He looked to his companion. Please, go ahead, he told McCall. This is really, fascinating.
Data, interjected Cinna. He turned to her. Yes? The Yana seemed uncomfortable. For some reason the android couldn't fathom. Taking hold of his arm, she said, Maybe we'd better go now. Data looked at her, a little surprised. Go? He echoed. But I really think we ought to go, she urged, still hanging onto the android's arm. I mean, now. It would have been impolite for Data to refuse, given the extent of his friend's insistence. Turning to McCall and Piazza, the android did his best to look apologetic. It seems I must be leaving now, he told them. Perhaps we can continue our conversation another time.
I'd like that, said McCall, smiling understandingly. Oh, just one more question before you go, Data. I was wondering where you get your hair cut. I wouldn't mind trying that look myself.
The android shrugged. I have never had my hair cut, so I cannot advise you in that regard. You see, he clarified, my hair only grows when I wish it to. And thus far, I have had no occasion to implement that wish. However, if I did encourage hair growth, it would... Excuse me, said someone whose voice Data didn't recognize. Turning, he saw that someone new had joined the conversation, and not just anyone. It was Cadet Glenn Majors. I couldn't help but overhear what you were talking about, Majors remarked. His attention was focused only on McCall and Piazza, as if Data and Cinna weren't even present. Maybe you two haven't been in the academy long enough to figure out how things work around here. But if I were you, I'd wise up, and fast. The android noticed the sudden change in the complexions of the two first-year cadets. Both McCall and Piazza had become red in the face. Am I making myself clear? Asked Majors. McCall nodded. Come on, he muttered, elbowing his companion. Uh-huh, Piazza agreed. A moment later, the two of them had slunk off. Majors turned to Data and Cinna. Sorry about that, he told them. Some people get their kicks needling others. Glancing back over his shoulder at the clutch of first-year cadets he'd been conversing with, he winked. Fortunately, he continued in a somewhat louder voice, you won't see too much of that by the end of your first year. By then, all the practical jokers have been weeded out. The android was beginning to understand now. McCall and Piazza had been having fun at his expense, a situation Cinna had apparently recognized, which was the reason she had wished him to withdraw from the conversation. Majors had recognized the situation as well, it seemed, and intervened on Data's behalf. The android was pleased by the second-year cadet's involvement, though he could not have said exactly why that should be. Thank you, Data told Majors. But Majors hadn't waited to hear the end of the android's statement. He was already on his way back to the group of first-year students he'd been addressing earlier. Come on, said Cinna. Let's go back to our quarters, Data. But the android didn't want to leave. He wished to wait until Majors completed his exchange with the other cadets, and then attempt to thank him again. I said come on, Liana repeated, and pulling on his arm, she guided him out of the briefing room. Chapter 2. It wasn't until they were out in the corridor, and quite alone, that Cinna turned to Data and snorted angrily. Sweet deities, she fumed. Couldn't you see what was going on in there? The android could only stare at her. Back on the Yosemite, the vessel that had brought him and the yawn to Earth, he and Cinna had risked their lives together. In the course of those events, he had seen her look afraid, resolute, and finally triumphant, but he had never seen her so positively incensed. "Of course," he said, "Cadets McCall and Piazza were ridiculing me, though I did not realize it at first. Cadet Majors intervened and caused them to stop, which is why I wanted to stay and find an opportunity to thank him properly." Cinna rolled her eyes. "Data, Majors stopped McCall and Piazza all right, and I'm glad he did. But he wasn't doing it for you. He was doing it to impress those other first-year cadets." "I do not understand," the android said. Truthfully, he didn't. He recalled Major's words verbatim. Not a difficult task, given the capabilities of his positronic brain, but he still didn't see his friend's point. "In fact," he remarked, I was pleased that Cadet Majors took such an interest in me. I believe I can only benefit from even a casual association with such an exemplary student." Cinna stopped in the middle of the corridor and turned to Data. "All right," she told him. "You like Cadet Majors so much. You learn all you can from him. I promise I won't say a word about it, no matter what." With that, she turned on her heel and marched down the corridor toward the turbolift. The android was certainly no expert on Yanish emotions, but it seemed to him it wouldn't be a good idea to follow Cinna at this particular time. Instead, he stood there in the corridor for several minutes, enduring the scrutiny of other cadets and crewmen as they walked in. Then, when Data was certain he had given Cinna a sufficient head start, he entered the turbolift and asked it to take him to his solitary quarters. All that first night on the Republic, Data sat in his room, pondering the details of the encounter that had led Cinna to become angry with him. By morning, he had to confess that he still didn't understand the vehemence of her reaction. How could she have observed the same things he had, and come to such different conclusions about them? As far as the android could tell, Cadet Major's actions had been rather chivalrous. And if I am going to be an asset to Starfleet, Data thought, it is about time I exhibited some confidence in my own judgment. The android found himself wishing that he were more like Glenn Majors. Now there was someone with confidence, someone who would never second-guess himself, someone whom it might be instructive to observe and to emulate. Data straightened in his chair as his course of action became clear to him. Looking up at the intercom grid hidden in the ceiling, he said, "Computer, where is Cadet Majors?" "Cadet Majors is in the ship's gymnasium," the computer reported. "Thank you," the android responded. If he had gleaned anything from his stay on the Tripoli, it was the importance of being polite. "You are welcome," returned the computer, just as politely, though its behavior stemmed from its programming, Data reflected, not its experience. Getting up, he headed for the door to his quarters. He would pay Glenn Majors a visit in the gymnasium, he resolved, and if it were possible, to learn confidence. He would do just that. The Republic's gymnasium was almost identical to the one Data had encountered on the Tripoli. It was a large, brightly lit room with a high ceiling and a great many mats strewn across the floor. In addition, there were 2 sets of hanging rings, a trio of leathery pommel horses, and a gleaming high bar made out of duranium. Ouch. As the android entered, he saw that Cadet Majors was hanging vertically from the high bar, with his back to him. A female cadet with long black hair was standing off to one side, intent on Majors as he began to move, arching his back almost imperceptibly at first, just to start himself swinging, and then kicking out with increasing enthusiasm at the end of each forward motion until his body was parallel to the floor at the high points of his arc. As the female watched, Major stepped up his efforts even more. After several seconds, he had achieved enough momentum to completely circle the bar, a feat he accomplished once, twice, and a third time before finally letting go of it. With consummate grace, the cadet somersaulted through the air and achieved a perfect landing some 5 meters in front of the bar. The female nodded. "Pretty good," she said. Majors approached her, extending his hand. "Just pretty good?" As he took her hand in his, the female frowned good-naturedly. "All right," she conceded. "Very good." "Come on," he continued. "Admit it. You've never seen anybody pull that off with such grace, such aplomb." He grinned. "And right about now, you're thinking, how can I get to know this hunk a little better?" The female rolled her eyes. "Give me a break," she told him, slipping her hand free. But Majors was undaunted. Leaning closer to her, so that his face was only inches from hers, he said, "Dinner tonight? Just you, me, and the stars?" Gazing at him, the female seemed to hesitate. Several seconds went by, and she still hadn't answered Major's question. Apparently, neither one of the cadets had noticed Data's entrance. It seemed to be as good a time as any to correct that situation. "Hello," said the android, marching across the sea of mats in the direction of Glenn Majors. "I witnessed your performance on the high bar, and like your companion, I believe it was very good." Both Majors and the female stared at him for a moment, their mouths hanging open. The female was the first to shut hers. "Data," said Majors, "what are you doing here?" The android shrugged. "I wish to express my gratitude for your actions in the briefing room last night. After all, you did come to my defense." Chuckling softly, the female cadet made her way past Data to the gymnasium exit. Seeing her go, Majors extended a hand in her direction as if to draw her back. "Wait," he called. "What about dinner?" The female darted a glance back over her shoulder at him. "I just remembered," she replied, smiling. "I've got other plans." As she left the room, Majors muttered something under his breath. The guttural quality of it rendered it impossible to make out. "I beg your pardon," the android responded. Majors turned to him, frowning. "Never mind." A pause. "Listen, Data, this is a bad time to be thanking me." He glanced at the exit. "A real bad time. Understand?" Data didn't understand. He said so. The human grunted. "All right. If you wanted to thank me, you've done that. We're even, right?" The android tilted his head to one side. "Actually, there was one other thing." "I had hoped." Majors looked at him. "What? You'd hoped what?" There was a distinct note of impatience in his voice. Data went on. "I had hoped you could teach me to be more confident." The cadet's brow furrowed. "More confident?" The android nodded. "You see, I lack human instincts. This puts me at a disadvantage when it comes to decision-making, not just in reaching a conclusion, but in having the self-assurance to carry it out." Majors nodded. "I get the picture, and you want me to teach you these things?" "Yes," said Data, "I do. What is more, I am willing to follow every step you take, from the time you wake until the time you go to sleep, if that is what it takes to improve myself in this area." The other cadet appeared to pale for a second or two. His Adam's apple climbed the length of his throat before falling again. "Tell you what," he answered finally. "The best way to learn confidence is from far away, from very far. If you watch me too closely, I'll be distracted, and then your, data will be flawed. You won't see the real me." The android thought about it for a moment. "It sounds as if you expect my presence to be obtrusive," he concluded. "If you do not want me to be in your way, all you need to do is say so. You cannot hurt my feelings. I do not have any." Major's eyes narrowed at the information. Abruptly, he smiled. Well then, I'm glad you see it that way, he said. Now, if you don't mind, he glanced meaningfully at the high bar, indicating his desire to resume his workout. Taking the hint, Data crossed the gymnasium and made use of the exit. As the sliding doors whooshed closed behind them, the android reflected on his conversation with Glenn Majors. Perhaps Data would not have the opportunity to obtain advice from the second-year cadet after all. However, he could do what Majors advised. He could observe the human from afar, and if he watched Majors very carefully, he might soon achieve some portion of the self-assurance he sought. In the days that followed, Data found that observing Cadet Majors unobtrusively was a good deal more difficult than it had first seemed. Despite his remarkable eyesight, there were few places on the Republic where he would have a clear view of Majors without the cadets having a clear view of him in return. However, the android didn't want the object of his scrutiny to feel put upon, so he did the best he could, and after a while he got rather good at covert surveillance. Unfortunately, he could not say that his efforts were actually teaching him anything about confidence, at least not yet. However, even Data was aware that some things just took time. Of course, the android could only devote a fraction of his time to the study of Glenn Majors. The bulk of each day was devoted to the instruments and scales he would be using to record the Super Jovian planet ignition. And while Majors was sometimes working side by side with Data during these sessions, both of them were too absorbed in what they were doing to be aware of much else. The android was also looking forward to learning other things. For instance, each subgroup of cadets was given a chance to man the ship's bridge for several hours. As it happened, Data's group was the last in line for this duty. As a result, it was late on the fourth day out from Earth when the android sat down in the helmsman's chair and looked out across the bridge at the Republic's main view screen. Glancing at his instrument panel, he noted that the ship was still proceeding at warp 8, the same speed it had achieved on leaving Earth's solar system. However, that was bound to change, and rather soon. The Beta Orientalis system was just ahead. In fact, Data estimated it would be necessary to slow to impulse power sometime in the next couple of minutes. No sooner had he made that determination than he felt a hand on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw that it belonged to Captain Clark, a tall woman with long, gray-streaked brown hair. She was smiling at him. "You've done a good job around here," she told him. "I thought I'd let you be the one to take us down to sublight." "Aye, sir," said the android. Making the necessary adjustments on his console, he did his best to comply with the captain's order. A moment later, he could see the streaks of starlight on the view screen diminishing in length as the ship's impulse engines took over. "Captain?" Data glanced over his shoulder at Cadet Petros, the petite honey blonde who had been assigned to the communications board. Like the android and Cinna, Petros was a first-year student at the academy. "Yes?" asked Captain Clark. "What is it, Petros?" The cadet stared at her monitor a moment before answering, as if trying to make sure she wasn't about to embarrass herself. "I believe I'm picking up a distress signal," she said at last. "Bearing 130, Mark 6, sir. At a distance of—" Again she hesitated. "It looks like 2.8 billion kilometers." Cadet Majors was sitting next to Data at the navigator's console. His fingers darted across his controls with precision and dispatch. "That's just 50 million kilometers or so from the Super Jovian worlds," he concluded. Data glanced at Cinna, who was seated at the science station, the glare of its monitors bathing her face in a green light. Then he looked at the captain. Clark was frowning slightly. "Hail the source of the signal," she instructed Petros. The cadet did as she was told. However, the hail produced no response other than a continuation of the distress signal. Captain Clark's frown was deepening by the minute. First Officer Sierra A stocky man with a thick mustache left the bridge's command center to stand by her side. "We're the only vessel in the area," he pointed out. "We've got to respond, even if we are on a training mission." As the android watched, Clark nodded. "I'm well aware of that, Juan." With a single glance, she took in all four of the cadets on her bridge. "I was thinking about them. After all, I did promise them a shot at some bridge duty." The first officer sighed. "Captain?" Clark nodded. "I know." Eyeing each cadet in turn, she expressed a silent apology. Then she said, "Sorry, people. This could be serious. I'm going to have to get some experienced officers up here." Cinna and Petros showed varying degrees of disappointment. However, Data fully understood the reasons for her decisions. Had he been in charge, he told himself he would likely have done the same thing. "On the other hand," the captain told them, "it'll be a good experience for you to see how we handle a distress call response. You can all stand to one side of communications and look on if you like." Unhesitatingly speaking for all of them, Cadet Major said, "We'd like that very much, sir." Captain Clark shot him an approving look, with just a hint of a smirk. "Then that's where you'll go, Mr. Majors. Just remember to wait until your relief shows up." As the android watched, Majors returned the captain's expression as if he were sharing a private joke with her. And perhaps he was. After all, with his record, he would clearly become a captain himself one day. "Aye, sir," replied Majors. "I'll remember."